Last week against the Beijing Summer Olympics, China is admitting the violent demonstrations have now spread into Tibetan communities and other provinces as well. China is also admitting it used deadly force against protesters, wounding 4 of them in the province of Sichuan. This admission comes hours after a spokesman claimed China did not use any deadly force.
At a news conference today, the Chinese Ministry of Foreign Affairs said its forces handled last week's Lhasa protests according to the law and did not use deadly weapons. Officials also said 24 people have been arrested so far after last week's protests, while another 170 people surrendered to authorities. Hundreds of troops have also been seen pouring into far-flung Tibetan areas as security is heightened. Chinese authorities have also barred Western journalists trying to report on the unrest and is no longer approving travel permits for tourists. Meanwhile, the Dalai Lama, who reiterated today that he will resign if violence in Tibet escalates, says he is ready to meet with Chinese leaders to discuss giving Tibetans autonomy under Chinese rule, but will only travel to Beijing if there was a real concrete development in relations between the government and Tibet.
Some concrete sort of indication come there. Really feel now, really is the time come to go there? I'm ready.
But China has repeatedly rejected his appeals, accusing him of being behind the protests from his base in the Indian town of Dharamshala. Meanwhile, in Nepal, police arrested at least 20 Tibetan protesters, including monks, as they tried to organize anti-China protests and march towards the United Nations office in the capital city, Kathmandu. Riot police carrying batons and plastic shields chased and grabbed small groups of protesters and pushed them into waiting vehicles. The UN has expressed deep concern over the excessive use of force by the Nepali police against peaceful Tibetan protesters and are urging the government to allow them their rights to peaceful assembly and freedom of expression.
Meanwhile, several hundred demonstrators rallied outside Parliament Hill and the Chinese embassy in Ottawa today. They came out to show their opposition to China's crackdown on the protests in Tibet. Emotionally charged pro-Tibetan activists called on Canada to boycott the Beijing Olympics and for China to respect human rights. Organizers say Canada can play a key role.
Pressuring the United Nations to send a fact-finding mission into Tibet immediately, and also to pressure the Chinese government to allow media access into Tibet.
They also want the International Olympic Committee to remove Tibet from the torch relay route. Prime Minister Stephen Harper sent a message to the protesters through a local Conservative MP.
Canada calls upon China to fully respect human rights and peaceful protest. Canada also calls on China to show restraint in dealing with this situation.
Protesters also marched to the Chinese embassy where they shouted and chanted for a free Tibet and for a stop to the violence. Earlier, the group had rallied outside a United Nations office in the downtown area.